Analysis of Sucker Punch, 2011. Plot. The story follows Babydoll, a young woman who is institutionalized in a mental asylum by her abusive stepfather. To cope with the harsh reality, she creates different layers of fantasy in her mind. The first layer is the asylum itself, where she is about to undergo a lobotomy. The second layer reimagines the asylum as a nightclub/brothel, symbolizing the oppression she faces. Finally, the third layer takes the form of epic fantasy worlds, battles against giant samurai, dragons, and futuristic robots, where Babydoll and other girls fight for their freedom. This layered narrative serves as a metaphor for Babydoll's internal struggle against trauma and loss of control over her life. Strengths. Symbolic storyline. The concept of shifting between layers of fantasy and reality is intriguing, offering different interpretations about trauma, freedom, and sacrifice. Visuals and aesthetics. Zack Snyder brings his signature style, slow motion, striking imagery, heavy use of CGI, and the feel of a graphic novel come to life. Each fantasy world has its own unique design, keeping the audience visually engaged. Soundtrack. The film features reimagined versions of classic songs, such as Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, adding to the hypnotic, dreamlike atmosphere. Action sequences. While over the top, the battles across the fantasy worlds are visually stunning, resembling epic video game cutscenes that appeal to fans of stylized action. Weaknesses. Confusing narrative. The constant shift between reality and fantasy can make the story difficult to follow. Lack of character development. Aside from Babydoll, the other girls are given little depth, making it harder to form a strong emotional connection with them. Controversial female representation. While the film attempts to critique female objectification and oppression, many critics argued that it actually reinforces those stereotypes by constantly sexualizing its characters. Style over substance. For some viewers, the visuals and grandiose set pieces overshadow the story itself, making the film feel more like a visual showcase than a cohesive narrative. Style and aesthetics. The film's strongest element is its visual style. Snyder blends vibrant colors, dramatic slow motion, and heavy digital effects to create a world where reality and fantasy blur together. Each level of Babydoll's imagination has its own distinct identity, from the dark asylum to the fantastical battlefields filled with creatures and machines. The soundtrack is carefully chosen to amplify both the emotional and aesthetic impact. Fun facts about Sucker Punch 2011. 1. A title with double meaning. Sucker Punch doesn't just sound cool, it's actually an expression in English that means an unexpected blow. It perfectly reflects both the action scenes and the emotional twists of the story. 2. Emily Browning on the soundtrack. Emily Browning, who plays Babydoll, actually recorded some of the film's songs herself, including the haunting cover of Sweet Dreams Are Made of This and Asleep by the Smiths. 3. Heavily inspired by video games and anime. Director Zack Snyder openly admitted that the movie's style was influenced by action video games and Japanese anime, which explains the over-the-top fantasy worlds and stylized battles. 4. The cut director's version. Warner Brothers forced Snyder to cut several scenes to secure a PG-13 rating. There's an extended version with about 18 extra minutes, adding more context and character development. 5. A darker original ending. Snyder revealed that the original ending was even darker, but the studio asked him to tone it down and make it a bit more hopeful for audiences. 6. Intense training for the cast. The actresses went through months of physical training and combat practice to perform many of the action scenes themselves, with minimal use of stunt doubles. 7. Inspired by Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz. The concept of layered fantasy worlds and a young woman escaping reality was loosely inspired by classics like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz. 8. From flop to cult classic. Even though the movie flopped at the box office and critics panned it, over the years it's gained a cult following, with fans defending its symbolic depth and bold style. Lessons from Sucker Punch 2011. The mind can be both a refuge and a prison. Babydoll creates fantasy worlds to escape the pain of her reality. It shows how imagination can be a survival tool, but it also reminds us that running away doesn't truly solve the problem. Freedom often comes at a price. The journey of the characters is marked by loss and sacrifice. The film suggests that true freedom, whether physical or emotional, always demands something in return. The hero isn't always who you expect. Even though Babydoll is the focus of the story, by the end we realized her struggle was actually about giving someone else a chance at freedom. Sometimes the real impact of our fight lies in how we help others. Oppression takes many forms. The asylum, the brothel, and the fantasy worlds all represent different layers of control. The film reflects how the struggle against domination, whether physical, psychological, or social, is a universal one. What you see isn't always the full story. The entire film is built on metaphors, reminding us that appearances can be deceiving and the deeper meaning often lies beneath the surface. Sucker Punch 2011 had an estimated budget of 82 million United States dollars. In terms of worldwide box office, the film grossed around 89 million United States dollars, which means it barely covered its production and marketing costs. In other words, it was considered a relative box office failure, although it later gained a cult following after its release. On Rotten Tomatoes, Sucker Punch 2011 has a 22% critic score and a 47% audience score, showing mostly negative reviews from critics but a more mixed reception from viewers. Now, here's our opinion.
I watched the movie Sucker Punch back in 2011, and honestly, it left me pretty confused. The film has three distinct layers that overlap. First, the story of Babydoll, a young woman who is unjustly sent to a mental institution by her stepfather and suffers a cruel fate. Then, a layer set in a brothel, and finally, a fantasy world filled with magical creatures and monsters that the protagonist creates to escape reality. This structure is confusing, and the first time I watched it, I got lost in several parts of the story. If you decide to make a multi-layered narrative, it's the director's responsibility to make sure the audience can follow it. Sucker Punch fails at this. But even with all the confusion, when I rewatched it, I realized the film delivers some powerful messages and lessons worth noticing. A key point is that Babydoll's fantasy worlds serve as a mental refuge from the suffering she experiences in reality. I related to this aspect of the film. How many of us haven't looked for some kind of escape when life gets unbearable? Babydoll creates her own psychological space of resistance, and that's what makes the story compelling. It's a form of fighting, a way to survive oppression. Regarding some of the criticisms the movie received, many people pointed out the sexualization of the characters because of their outfits. I'll be frank, I couldn't sexualize any of them, especially Babydoll. Showing a bit of belly or legs doesn't automatically turn anyone into a sexual object. What the film really shows is strength, posture, and power, not pornography. Now, listen closely. These criticisms often come from jealous feminist women who can't stand to see other women beautiful and strong on screen. It's pure hypocrisy. When a handsome man appears in a film, they don't complain. But every time a beautiful woman appears, they throw a fit. These complaints are pure envy and hypocrisy, so we should stop listening to jealous feminists. The feminist movement is a cancer in society, bringing ridiculous discussions that only favor women. There is no real equality in feminism, just envy and hypocrisy. Another point that feels strange is the ending with the lobotomy. For those who don't know, a lobotomy is an old and cruel surgical procedure that cut parts of the brain to control deviant behavior. It often left patients irreversibly damaged, losing memory, emotions, and personality. In the movie, Babydoll undergoes the procedure because she challenges the institution and threatens the control of those in power. And here's the clever, or at least interesting part. After the lobotomy, Babydoll's expression becomes serene and calm. This indicates that even subjected to such an extreme and inhumane procedure, she found a form of mental peace. She wanted, in a way, the end of her suffering. Overall, the film is about the struggle for freedom and control over one's own life in the face of brutal oppression. It shows that even in extreme situations of abuse and manipulation, it's possible to find inner strength and create forms of resistance, whether through imagination or symbolic acts of sacrifice. It's about overcoming trauma, autonomy, and female empowerment in a scenario of absolute control. There are also important lessons about solidarity and sacrifice. When Babydoll saves Sweet Pea, she demonstrates that resisting isn't just about fighting for yourself, but also for others. She gives up her own literal chance to escape so that another person can gain real freedom, turning her liberation into something symbolic. It's a gesture of courage and power that doesn't need to be literal to be impactful. And finally, although it might seem that Babydoll mentally died after the lobotomy, that's not entirely true. She remains in the fantasy world she created, maintaining her freedom and autonomy symbolically. Her smile at the end is not trivial. It's her victory over suffering, even without control over the external reality. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that Sucker Punch is visually stunning. Zack Snyder goes all out with the action scenes and the design of the fantasy worlds, creating stylized combat sequences that feel like video games or anime. This reinforces the contrast between the brutality of reality and the power of the protagonist's mental universe. It's a film that provokes, irritates, confuses, and challenges, and that's exactly what makes it interesting. But overall, I thought the movie had a really interesting vibe and the special effects were incredible. The problem is that the story is compromised and poorly told. One thing that disappointed me is that the fantasy world with dragons, samurai, giants, and epic battles actually serves no purpose in the main story. It's just Babydoll's imagination. That's frustrating because those scenes could make a full movie on their own, but here they only take up space without adding anything to the central narrative, which is the mental institution. It's the same irritating feeling you get when you watch a protagonist having an epic battle and then find out that it was all just a dream. None of it actually happened. I didn't really like the movie overall, to be honest. I enjoyed the special effects, the aesthetic, and some action scenes, but the story ultimately didn't grab me. Everything in the movie has a good idea, it's just badly executed. That's all for now. Session closed. If all goes well, see you in the next video. Until then.